Mark Lewis. There is an old Chinese proverb that roughly translates to live in interesting times. If you don't look into it, it may seem like something encouraging, but in reality, it's just a polite way of saying, go to hell. Well, let me tell you, I lived in just such interesting times. It all started last summer when my wife of 7 years, Andrea, was preparing to go to a sales conference in Chicago. Before we got married, Andrea worked as a sales consultant for a large regional building materials company. When we found out about her pregnancy during her honeymoon, she went on maternity leave. She later extended it to have our second child, little Mark Jr. It was a turbulent but wonderful 7 years, the first experience of parenthood, raising children together. Sleepless nights, tantrums, potty training, but also a lot of laughter, first words, first steps, and countless hugs. I thought we were happy. Mark, dear, can you put my hair dryer in your suitcase? I'm late, I shouted back. Of course, honey, and hurried upstairs to our bedroom. Andrea has been back at work for over a year now. At first, I was not delighted. It seemed to me that the children needed her at home, and we did not experience financial difficulties. But Andrea was persistent, and she promised to work only part-time, leaving enough time for me and the children. I had my doubts, but I had to admit, it had worked so far. The kids were happy, I was happy, and she was happy. Well, like I said, I really thought we were all happy. The hairdryer was still plugged into the bathroom. I turned it off, rolled up the cord, and walked over to Andrea's suitcase. It was a huge and expensive suitcase that we bought when Andrea first started traveling on business. It lay open on our king-size bed. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I looked inside and found sexy lingerie, a box of condoms, or something that screamed at me in huge neon green letters, "This woman is cheating on you, friend." But no, nothing like that. Andrea was smart. Did I mention she's very smart? Perhaps that's why she made such a stupid mistake. She probably thought she could hide anything. No, what happened was that while putting the hair dryer in the mesh compartment of the suitcase, I accidentally touched a tiny piece of paper with my hand. It was a slightly tattered and faded check. Nothing suspicious at first glance. It looked like a receipt for Pepsi. Nothing special, except it was in Spanish and had an address in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. I am 41 years old and work in the insurance industry. Yes, I know, but before you think I'm that sad guy who denies your grandma her payments or spends her days doing actuarial tables, let me explain what I do. I'm a field analyst. My company investigates disability insurance claims for major insurance companies. Basically, I'm the guy who follows your uncle while he goes to Zumba class or skydives and writes a report confirming that his complaints of back pain may be slightly exaggerated. This involves a bit of forensic accounting, a bit of social engineering, a lot of sitting in the car and writing reports, and the occasional trip to the circuit court to testify. If you think of me as a cheap, unlicensed private investigator who mostly sits in a car and takes photos, you'll probably be right. So, as we have already found out, I do not have any outstanding skills. I'm not a sniper, not a former Special Forces soldier, and not a hacker. However, two things I am really good at are people lying to my face and keeping a straight face while they do it. Well, think about it. Who will tell me the truth if their disability payments are on the line? And just hear the incredible stories people try to tell me when I catch them playing football for an hour, even though they supposedly can't walk. Politicians would blush at such impudence. Anyway, back to the check. I looked at it for a couple of seconds, put it in my pocket, and went downstairs. By the time I caught up with Andrea in the kitchen, I already knew something was wrong. You see, we bought this suitcase brand new when Andrea went on her first business trip, just a month after she started working. I knew, or at least thought I knew from Andrea's words, that none of her trips were to Mexico. I also knew for a fact from the date on the receipt that while she was supposed to be in upstate New York, she appeared to be sipping a cold Pepsi on the beach at one of Mexico's most famous tourist spots. Andrea heard my steps and turned around, with a sly smile on her face. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her thin glasses sat precariously on the tip of her nose. "Here, dear," she said, handing me a piece of lined paper. This is the children's schedule for this week. My mom has agreed to drive them to some events, but you'll need to take over Thursday and Friday. Are you sure you can take them to her every morning? I smiled at her. She was such a caring mother, one of the things that has deepened my love for her over the years. I really needed my ability to keep a straight face. No problem, dear, I answered cheerfully. Don't worry about anything. I have everything under control here. Just come home safe and sound. I held out my arms to her, and she pressed herself against me, lifting her head to give me a long kiss. You are such a wonderful father. I'm so lucky to have you, she smiled at me. I smiled back, but looked over her shoulder. I noticed her purse was open on the countertop. I'll carry your suitcase. Why don't you go to the toilet before heading to the airport? Another interesting thing about Andrea was that she had an irresistible habit of going to the toilet before leaving the house. 2 children and a slightly weakened pelvic floor have left her with a bit of a problem. She often wore pads in her underwear because of this, and my suggestion worked, sending her running to the bathroom. Without wasting any time, I went to the table and opened her purse. 2 books, romantic, sunglasses, chewing gum, keys what? Phone I don't have time to check, wallet cash, driver's license. Again, no condoms like I said. Andrea wasn't that easy. Nothing that looked suspicious, at least if I hadn't seen that check. Passport. I didn't even know she had a passport. I opened it and started flipping through the pages. 2 stamps, Mexico and Queensland, Australia. Crap. I burst out a little louder than I wanted. I heard the bathroom flush and quickly stuffed everything back into my bag. Australia. What the hell? How could I not know that my wife flew to the other side of the world for work? Seriously, was I that inconsiderate? Was there anything that could have given her away? How did she have the nerve to pull this off? I was startled, but the sound of water coming out of the tap reminded me that I needed to move quickly. I ran upstairs, closed and zipped up her suitcase, and then started downstairs. Crap, crap, damn, I muttered to myself. Andrea was already waiting for me at the front door. Time to keep your cool. Are you okay, dear? You look a little nervous. She reached out her hand to touch my forehead with a caring look. I was amazed by her impudence. Poker face, Mark. Poker face. Yes, everything is fine, Angie, I said, putting the suitcase near the door. Her Uber was about to arrive. So, I continued, which hotel will you stay in Chicago? Actually, I haven't asked this before. I realized that I had generally asked her too few questions that were probably worth asking. To her credit, she didn't flinch for a second. I'll be at the Marriott downtown sharing a room with Mags. The room is in her name. Mags was Margaret Fields. Andrea and Mags went to university together, graduated together, and eventually found work at the same company. We rarely saw her after Susie was born, but now that they both worked at Redfield Building Supplies, Mags became an increasingly intrusive presence in our lives. To tell the truth, I couldn't stand this woman. She was loud, vulgar, and a bit promiscuous. The fact that she got married a couple of years ago has hardly changed her behavior. I may be a cheap detective, but it wasn't hard to figure out who Margaret Fields was. Andrea's phone beeped with the sound of a new message. She looked at the screen and said, "My car is already here, dear. Don't forget to pick up the kids from Mom before 6. Love you." She kissed me deeply again, and I helped her drag her suitcase out to the waiting car. I was already starting to suspect even the Uber driver. What if he was her secret lover? But the documents on the windshield and his dented appearance indicated that he was an ordinary driver. I hugged Andrea again, and as soon as she was out of sight, I rushed back into the house to check everything online. The first thing I did was check the flights. I made sure that the flight to Chicago that Andrea mentioned actually existed and departed at the specified time. The flight number matched. I also looked at international flights that departed around the same time, but that didn't tell me anything. After all, she could have had a connecting flight. Then I checked her social media, Facebook, Instagram, her email, everything I had access to or passwords to. No changes, no clear evidence. No suspicious conversations. I even went through her list of subscriptions and subscribers, trying to find someone unfamiliar. But other than a few colleagues on LinkedIn, everyone else was known to me. I calmed down a little and began to think. Realistically speaking, the only reason Andrea could lie so blatantly about her trips was because she was having an affair. It sounded crazy, but what other explanation could there be? Smuggling of illegal substances? That would be even more absurd. What was she doing? Have you met someone? Traveling with someone? With whom exactly? With your ex-boyfriend? With a colleague? Is she on a sugar babes type site? Rich old men paying for her flights to spend a week with her. I began to calm down. The adrenaline from the initial shock subsided, leaving only a painful feeling in my stomach. I didn't have a single clue. The best sources of information, her laptop and phone, were with her and would only return with her. All I knew was that my wife had lied to me more than once about her business trips, and that was enough for me to begin to suspect the worst. The biggest problem was that my natural cynicism, which I acquired from a job where people lie at every turn, did not allow me to even pretend that there might be some less painful explanation. No, I'll have to tighten my belt and continue. Pick up the kids first, then try asking Andrea's mother. I took the car keys and drove to her parents' house. I always liked Andrea's parents. They were simple, sincere, and spoke directly, without unnecessary tricks. Her father is a kind-hearted retired electrician. Her mother is a caring housewife and church activist. I didn't think they could be helping Andrea hide the affair or be somehow involved in destroying our marriage. But my anxiety and suspicions reached boiling point. It took me a lot of effort to put on a fake smile on my face when I picked up the children. I tried to gently ask Andrea's mom, Clarice, about the trip, but she didn't seem to know any more than I did. She only mentioned that she did not think it was right for a young mother to leave her children so often to work. I agreed with a guilty look. It shouldn't have been this way, I added quietly. Clarice nodded and patted my cheek. You are a good husband, Mark. Try to talk to her when she returns. Crap. Was it an innocent comment or a subtle hint? Yes, I was going crazy. Clarice and her husband Herb could not have been involved in this. They simply weren't capable of this. But on the other hand, I would never have thought that Andrea was capable of this. That's what I know, right? I received a call from Andrea that evening. She said everything was fine, that she was relaxing in her hotel room in Chicago, and that she was going to spend the day with Mags on Lake Michigan tomorrow. Apparently, a friend of their mutual acquaintance owns a boat. I told her that I miss her and love her. Then she talked to the children. I tried to catch even a hint of lies in her voice, but it was unbearable. The kids and I had a pretty dull weekend. I worked with them as best I could, organized a movie night, took them to the park, to the local children's play center. For dinner, McDonald's, for breakfast, waffles. Everything that children could like. Maybe I spoiled them a little, feeling guilty that I assumed their family was about to collapse. Unlike Andrea, I grew up in a single-parent family and knew all the difficulties that came with it. Just thinking about it made me both sad and angry. During the week that Andrea was away, I tried to find a hole in her alibi. I called the hotel and asked to speak to her number. She wasn't there, but she called me back from her cell phone a few minutes later. It looked suspicious, but there was no clear evidence. I invited Frank, Mag's husband, to dinner and tried to talk carefully about the trip. Everything he said matched what Andrea told me. I tried to find out more about her past trips, but to be honest, I had never paid attention to the details of her business trips before, so my questions turned out to be rather superficial. Well, now I have become much more attentive. I even tried to find information about the event Andrea was supposed to be at, but since I didn't provide any details, I had no idea where to start. By midweek, I knew I needed to get answers from Andrea's employer, but I didn't know how to do it without giving myself away. I was at a dead end, and it was killing me. You see, while I was investigating, the anxiety that had been plaguing me since Andrea left was under control. But as soon as I was left without a new lead, this feeling returned with a vengeance, causing me real torment. I was starting to lose my mind, and the cracks in my mask began to show. I was irritated with the children and looked gloomily at my colleagues. He slammed doors in fits of rage and was ready to lash out at Andrea during our evening calls. I knew I was going crazy and needed help urgently, so I did what I swore I would never do. I called my older brother. Understand that my relationship with my brother Jake was complicated, to say the least. He and I never saw eye to eye on many things. I was a liberal before, perhaps even more ardent. He is a conservative now, probably less strict. I believed recycling saved the planet. He thought it was a waste of tax money to make it look like work. I loved cats, he loved dogs. My wife is an educated, slightly bookish feminist, and his wife is a plastic, trophy wife with unnaturally huge breasts. You got it. He picked up the phone on the third ring. Hey, Mark, who died. Okay, I couldn't be mad at him here. The last time I called him directly was 4 years ago when our father died. I sighed and replied, my marriage. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. He was probably trying to figure out if I was joking or being serious. Crap. What's happened? I could almost hear him changing his position, becoming more attentive. Like I said, my brother and I didn't see eye to eye on much of anything, and he probably thought I was a weakling and a liberal wimp. But despite this, I remained his younger brother. I knew that I might regret turning to him for help. Damn, I was sure of it. But I also knew that if anyone would help me, it would be him. I used to include Andrea on this list, but now I wasn't sure. Jake was the type of brother who could beat you up for the TV remote control, but who would kill anyone who dared hurt you. If I had to describe his attitude towards me, it would sound something like this. I can give this little shit a hard time for anything I want, but don't you dare even touch him or I'll destroy you. It was strange, but calming in its own way. I told him everything. You see, Mark, if you mess things up now, she'll just become more careful and hide her affairs even more carefully. I hate to admit it, but Andrea is pretty smart for a woman. I snorted. This reminded me who I was talking to. Looks like he just said that to tease me. Okay, so you said she's at the Marriott until Sunday morning and then comes home. I confirmed and added that we talk on the phone every evening. Video or just voice? He asked. I wanted to hit myself in the forehead. Only voice. Did you even try to call her via video call? I bet she always calls you first. It was true. I always waited for her to call me in the evening before the children went to bed. During the day, we corresponded only by text messages. Basically, she could be anywhere and do anything, and it would be quite easy to hide it. I felt like an idiot. I should have been smarter. But honestly, I trusted my wife completely. So, stop pulling the cat by the tail. Let's find out what she's really doing, Jake muttered. I heard a rustling sound on the other end of the line, and then he shouted into the distance. Mandy, pack your things. We're going to Chicago for the weekend. What? Are you serious? I blurted out. Like a heart attack, bro. You have small children, and you can't leave without making Andrea suspicious. We have teenagers, and we can leave them with Mandy's parents. We know where she should be and with whom. Andrea has probably only seen Mandy and I a couple of times, which reminds me you'll need to send me a recent photo of her. He paused, thinking about something. You remember Grandpa John, right? Our paternal grandfather, John Lewis, was a first sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. Yes, I didn't know what he was getting at. He once told me a story about how he received one of his Purple Hearts. This was in Korea. He rode passing jeeps up and down the convoy. I jumped off one and stepped right on mine. Jake paused. But the thing is, it wasn't the landmine that got him the Purple Heart. The explosion barely touched him. So what then? I asked. When he landed, he fell on his bayonet. Jake didn't explain further. Andrea's mind blasted me 100 feet into the air, and I had to make sure I didn't land on my bayonet. Jake Lewis. Mandy and I were sitting in the bar at the Marriott Hotel on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. She was drinking some weird thing called a raspberry Jalisco margarita, and I was making out with an old friend, straight Kentucky bourbon. The bar was typical. Nothing special, clearly renovated in the last decade. Banality, mediocrity in general, what you expect from a corporate chain that tries to look different from what it really is. My dear Mandy was chatting with the bartender, a rather pleasant woman with a smoky voice and a face to match it, and I wondered what was so magnificent about a number of hotels and shops. I'm sure Mandy will explain it to me later. I also wondered if I had taken on more than I could handle. Don't get me wrong, I'm a smart guy. Damn competent. I usually know my limitations and abilities. The problem is that I just can't sit still. Perhaps that is why I became an engineer. My hands cannot tolerate idleness. My mind must be busy. When I heard about Mark's problem, I couldn't help but come up with a stupid plan. My wife and I would just rush to Chicago, find Andrea, and catch her red-handed. Probably, deep down, I also wanted to prove to my younger brother that I was not only the older brother by birthright, but also smarter, wiser, more courageous, and, most importantly, better at his job than he himself. After all, he is an investigator, and his wife cheated on him for months, maybe even a year, before he found out. And I was going to expose this bitch and provide evidence. That's it, Mark. It was mean, and I knew it. This is the problem with idleness, it makes me think. And believe me, no one needs Jake Lewis thinking about the meaning of life. Bad things happen when I dig deep into my soul, like that damn weekend in San Jose. I've done a lot of things in my life that I later regretted, and I'm too smart not to understand why. Therefore, for the sake of self-preservation, it is better to simply ignore the skeletons in the closet and try not to repeat the mistakes, as much as possible. I set the glass on the worn glass holder and looked around the bar. I had a rough idea of what Andrea looked like. I had enough photographs of her from my brother. Mark even guessed that if Andrea really was not in Chicago, I might have to track down her friend Maggie, so he sent me some pictures of her. But the likelihood of simply stumbling upon one of them was negligible. I needed a better plan. The crowd at the bar was fairly quiet for a Friday night, but that was to be expected. This is not a hotel where loud parties take place. Most people went about their business, but every now and then one of the businessmen would go wide-eyed, or a woman would jokingly hit her friend on the shoulder and point to her chest as if she were showing off 2 watermelons. I called it the bimbo effect. No matter what room Mandy was in, she was always the center of attention, open or furtive. She's the only woman I've ever seen get called out by a mother with a baby stroller. Hey, nice breasts. And I have witnessed more than once people of both sexes crash into walls, lampposts, shopping carts, or just each other as my girlfriend walked down the street in heels, her whole body swaying like a psychedelic jelly from an erotic fantasy. My Mandy is 5'8" 173 centimeters, and 140 pounds 63 kilograms of pure unbridled sexual fantasy, from bleached blonde hair roots to pink pedicured nails and everything in between. The makeup is always heavy and sexy. Eyelashes, false eyelashes, at least 2 inches. Lips are so full that they look like another organ. Botox to create the effect of a raised upper lip. The breasts are incredible. 3000 cc of saline in a silicone shell under a natural double D pair. The waist is flat and tight thanks to regular yoga and several butt enhancement procedures, which transfer fat from the rest of the body into a butt that could put any famous butt to shame. Her burger milkshake diet has been repeated 4 times now, and the result would make Kim Kardashian look like a boy. This is my Mandy, my wife of 17 years, my dream woman, my friend to the end, mother of our 2 beautiful daughters, and when we still find time, my personal toy ideal. We have a terribly codependent relationship, and we enjoy it. It has always been this way, and will probably remain so. I know that I will never find another woman who would go to such extremes to make my fantasies come true, and she knows that the further she goes in this direction, the more hopelessly I depend on her. Believe me, from the outside it may seem that I have all the power in our relationship, because she is all so caring and submissive, but there is no more obvious example of power from below than our entire history, and I understand this perfectly. So yes, from the outside we may look like a rich guy with his probably ex-dancer as his trophy wife. But if you look closely, it becomes clear where the truth is. This was especially understood by those who knew us in the early years of marriage and remembered Amanda. There are almost no such people left now, but she has photographs that she sometimes shows. This always causes a flurry of surprise. So, imagine how difficult it is for us to remain who we are while raising two teenagers. Personally, it seems to me that they are equally likely to either rebel against us and become Amish, or follow in their mother's footsteps and open accounts to become live models. As I already said, everything was as usual. People stared at Mandy. Mandy chatted to anyone who would listen, and I wondered how to get results out of the mess I had gotten myself into. Mandy spoke, breaking me out of my reverie. "Jake, honey, do you want something to eat? Maybe some snacks? I think this margarita has already gone to my head." Um, yes, I guess. What do they have?" Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, which was usually a bad sign because Mandy loves new things, and I learned long ago that new things rarely go with good food. "Well," she began in her playful tone, "Beatrice says the vegetarian Asian sliders here are simply divine." I didn't like where the conversation was going. The word vegetarian gave me goosebumps. "Beatrice," I clarified. "Oh, the bartender I was chatting with. Very nice woman. Did you know her brother joined the Taliban?" I almost choked on the rest of my bourbon. "What? Mandy, how do I know this? And why did she tell you this?" She just shrugged, causing her huge breasts to bounce up and down. It seems that somewhere behind me, I heard the sound of a fall. "Don't know. We were talking about where to find good platform heels here in Chicago, and my Mandy. She always knew how to win people over. She certainly inherited her gift for communication from her father, a used car dealer in Jacksonville, Florida. Even before she turned into a bionic beauty, she easily connected with anyone and made them reveal their darkest secrets in a matter of minutes." I interrupted her. "Wait, dear." An idea slowly began to form in my head. It was much better than my original plan of pretending to be a courier to find out which room Maggie and Andrea were staying in, and a little more meat than an outright bribe. I smiled and explained the details to Mandy. Thanks to a gentle question posed by Mandy's new friend Beatrice, an hour later we changed rooms on the 10th floor, 2 doors down the hall from our target. It was a Friday night, so I knew Mandy really wanted to either go out and have fun or stay in and have some fun, and to be honest, I felt the same way. But I promised my little brother that I would do everything possible to find out what his supposedly cheating wife was doing. I was just hoping that we'd get this over within less than one episode of Scooby-Doo, and I'd be deep in Daphne right after the commercial break. Ruby-dooby-doo, motherfuckers. Finally, Mandy and I conferred and came up with what we thought was a great plan that ended up being pretty stupid. You see, the hotel hallway curved around the building, and at the corner there was a small bench and a drink machine. The plan was simple. I ordered a couple bottles of the best California sparkling white wine, grabbed the ice buckets that were there, and Mandy and I sat down on the bench for a long, long session of passionate kissing. Seriously, who would pay attention to a drunk couple swapping spit on a Friday night in a random Chicago hotel? Every time we heard the elevator ding or the sound of a door opening, we would slow down the giggles and hugs to look back and see who it was. They both had their phones ready to record video in case we saw Maggie or Andrea. But to be honest, by 11 p.m., we were already completely drunk and began to forget why we were here in the first place. We got so hot that Mandy had already managed to satisfy me. I don't know if I mentioned that I was already pretty drunk. The nice man who came up to ask us to stop contented himself with sending us back to our room instead of throwing us out of the hotel. So at least in some ways we were lucky. "Hey, don't be surprised." I immediately said that it was a stupid plan. The next day was our last chance to get evidence for Mark, and this time I wisely included him in the planning. It turned out that he was really a better investigator than me. Just imagine. The plan was simple. When Andrea is talking to Mark on the phone, he will send me a message, and I will go to her number and start knocking and making noise. That's what we did. I barely had time to start screaming when a tall man of about 40 with gray hair opened the door, demanding to know what the hell I was doing here. Behind him, I noticed Maggie, covered with a blanket, clearly naked. Andrea was nowhere to be found. I apologized and mumbled, "Lo senti, senor," with a terrible Mexican accent. Mandy stood slightly behind, secretly recording everything on her smartphone. We hoped that Andrea would not recognize us, since she had only seen us a few times, and since then we have both changed. I grew a beard, and Mandy had $40,000 worth of surgeries. And Maggie never met us at all. A few minutes later, I received a message from Mark. He didn't hear anything. As they say, the silence was deafening. Mandy Lewis. Oh my God, this was the weirdest and honestly most fun mini trip I've had in a long time. These spy games are so crazy. Usually on vacation, we do the standard things: drink, eat, have sex, and of course, do my second favorite thing, shopping. Guess what my first is? But having a goal for the holidays is incredibly exciting. I was absolutely charged with a desire to expose this cheater, Andrea. And yes, yesterday's observation was just awesome. Of course, we screwed everything up and didn't catch anyone, but honestly, it was a completely stupid plan. But I love sex in public. Oh my God, every time we find ourselves in a new city or even 50 miles from home, I feel so free to be myself. I can dress the way I want, behave the way I want, in short, be myself. Don't get me wrong, I love my kids, and they put up with a lot having me as a mom. But damn, I need to break away sometimes. Jake understands me. He always understood. We try to do this at home, but it's hard to be a horny toy when everything can only be turned on from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the guest room at the other end of the house. So here it is. I always try to make sure Jake relaxes while on vacation too. He usually gives in, but he is very against public pranks. I know that he worries about me, tries to ensure that I do not go beyond the boundaries of what is permitted, so that this monster he created does not destroy our lives. I understand that. I love him for this. But sometimes this monster wins. Yesterday, he definitely won. I, of course, pretended to drink more than I actually did until I worked hard to keep poor Jake from stopping the whole thing. It's a balance: get him drunk enough to do it on a bench in a hotel hallway, but not so drunk that he gets the whiskey curse. Luckily, yesterday I hit the nail on the head, and so did he. Heh, it was incredible. Anyway, after we screwed up the first night, Mark and I got together and came up with a smarter plan. He was also cool because he freed up the day for us to go shopping on the Magnificent Mile. I didn't max out my credit card, but I had to satisfy him in the Nordstrom fitting room to get everything I wanted. It was a compromise, honestly. So, the new plan worked flawlessly. We confirmed that Andrea was not in Chicago, or at least she didn't share a room with Maggie. After this, Jake and Mark had a long discussion about the new plan, which brings us to today. We knew exactly what flight Andrea would be on back from Chicago to Houston, so we arrived at the airport in advance of our own flight and just hung around, drinking coffee, texting with the kids, playing on our phones, sitting near the gate of her flight. Half an hour before boarding, we saw her friend Maggie with some man, the same one we saw at the hotel. They held hands, hugged, and kissed from time to time. Nobody asked me, but I recorded them on video. I know that she is married, and I know that this is not her husband. Bitch. Oops, I think I said it wrong. I mean, I'm a bitch myself. I'm just a bitch for one man, who sometimes shares me on the internet with several thousand viewers. My channel, to be honest, is quite popular. In short, being a bitch is fine, but don't lie or cheat. Being honest about my promiscuity is what Jake calls one of my fundamental life values. I have others, but honesty is one of the most important. I was starting to wonder if we'd still have time to stop at Starbucks for a mocha when Jake elbowed me in the chest. He was probably aiming for the rib, but honestly, there's too much chest there to miss. I followed his gaze and slowly said, "Ooh," while picking up the phone to start recording. Andrea Lewis Hampton. "It's her, isn't it?" I asked my husband. "Yes, and I don't know who this man is with her. He looks a little old, doesn't he?" I chuckled. Whose cow would moo, you old thief of young hearts? I grinned. Jake is 10 years older than me. Best decision of my life. My eyes are no longer the same as yours. What is written on the bag he is carrying? He asked. I squinted, but was able to make it out thanks to the laser vision correction Jake gave me for our second anniversary. Royal Ontario Museum, I muttered. Let me take a look. He started fiddling with the phone. I thought he was looking at the flight schedule. The plane from Toronto landed about an hour ago. There would be just enough time to go through customs and get here. I don't understand, I said. Why such secrecy? If she decided to run away with someone, why not do it in Chicago? This is simply illogical. I looked at my daughter-in-law and the man who was with her. He looked a little older, with a receding hairline and his hair beginning to thin. Light belly, about 6 feet tall. Nice appearance, but nothing special. Definitely no more attractive than Jake's brother, and certainly less fit, although a little taller. They stood next to each other. He sometimes barely touched her hand, but did not kiss, and the distance between them was more like that of good friends than of lovers. I think we better get going, honey, or we'll miss our flight. Can you send this video to Mark? I nodded, and we both stood up, holding hands, and headed towards our exit. Our plane to Fort Lauderdale was leaving in 40 minutes, and I decided to leave thoughts of mysterious betrayals behind my back. Instead, I began to wonder if I could find a bar to get Jake drunk enough to renew his 10 Scissors and Meter Club membership before I went back to mommy mode. Andrea Lewis Hampton. Paul was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out the words because of the noise in my head. This has been happening more and more lately, especially on this trip. Anxiety. A pressing feeling of guilt, as if the bottom of my stomach was falling through the floor, dragging with it everything I had eaten. I was in complete disarray, sewn from scraps that were about to fall apart. Mark, Susie, little Mark, my family. What the hell am I doing? How did I get to this point? The next event will be in Hawaii, Paul continued. The same as now, but due to the time difference, we will have to take off earlier. We need you on Friday and Saturday both weekends. Hawaii. That's where Mark and I spent our honeymoon. We conceived our daughter Susan there. I wanted to burst into tears. Hey, Andy, are you listening to me? Paul touched my hand. I instinctively recoiled. Why, yes. Just send me the details later. Paul stared at me. Listen, Andy, you wanted this yourself. She said you need it. He didn't lie. I really said that. I'll never understand women like you. One night you're hotter than a sinner from hell, and the next day you act like we shot your puppy, he muttered irritably. His words were true. I had nothing to add. Instead, I just stood there silently until he realized the conversation was over and moved away. Fucking bastard. I walked past Mags without even looking at her and John and stopped in front of a huge window overlooking the runway. A plane was taxiing towards her, picking up speed to rise into the skies. How I dreamed of being in his place, to give everything to fly away from the disaster into which I turned my life. I wanted to become a mother again. Being home with my little kids, changing diapers, playing the alphabet game, taking them to the park, wiping their cute little faces after dinner. Waiting for Mark to come home, getting a kiss, getting a foot massage, the four of us sitting on the couch and hugging each other. If I had known then what I know now, I would never have interacted with Paul Jackson again. I would never go back to work at RBS. I would never have betrayed my family and myself the way I did. I needed to pull myself together, otherwise I would start crying right before boarding. I looked at my watch. It was almost time to take another pill. She will help. It will help me not to think about that hole from which I will never get out. I took a deep breath. I knew everything would be fine. These transitional moments have always been difficult for me. Either manic joy or depressing depression, you never know what awaits you. But as soon as I crossed the threshold of the plane, my thoughts and feelings returned to the box. Good, heavy, and dark. One in which it's easy to hide everything you don't want to see. Hawaii? Yes, I knew this would happen. But for now, you can put it in a box and not think about it. Mark Lewis. I sat in my favorite chair, the color of vomit green. We found it in the garage when we first moved into our house. It must have been left behind by the previous owners, and it looked like it had served someone else since the 70s. However, the chair was comfortable, it reclined, and it was where I preferred to sit when I had to think really, really hard. Today, however, it was very, very difficult to think. My wife, Andrea. I didn't know what to do with her. I didn't know what she was doing, at least not completely. It's already clear that she was lying to me. More precisely, I already knew this before her last business trip, but the actions of my disgruntled brother and his irresistible wife only made her betrayal more real. It's funny how you can turn a blind eye to problems you don't see or convince yourself that they are smaller than they really are. This was probably the route I would have taken if my sister-in-law hadn't sent me those videos she recorded over the weekend. The video of Mags naked in bed with some stranger didn't really surprise me. It might come as a surprise to Frank if I decided to show him the tape, but I always knew that Mags was a walking woman. It wasn't some big revelation. Looking back, I should have tried harder to distance Andrea from her, but I think I got too complacent, thinking that since Mags barely showed up at our house while Andrea was home with the kids, it was no big deal. I hadn't thought about what her return to work at RBS might entail. As for Andrea, what did I really know? Oh, I knew she went on business trips, or more accurately, that she lied to me about where she was going. I knew she was lying to me and the kids on the phone about where she was and what she was doing. Because, let's face it, it's hard to spend a day shopping in Chicago when you're actually in Canada. But now I have a video. She and her colleague arrive at the gate together for a plane heading from Chicago to Houston. I probably spent an hour watching those few minutes of video, studying her every move, every gesture. I looked to see if she was wearing a wedding ring. Does he smile? Were they close? When he touched her, she recoiled slightly. But was it out of surprise? Or from guilt? The answers I sought only brought me more questions. To some extent, I was an investigator. Looked for false statements, fake medical records, exposed lies. But this was not the same at all. However, I knew how such processes worked. I knew how to get to the truth. But did I want it? I looked at my children, Susie and Mark Jr., who were intently coloring new coloring books. They painted their scenes with genuine joy, sticking out their tongues, enthusiastically working with pencils. They were so blissfully unaware that their reality was about to collapse. Not their fault, of course, but what about me? If I do something, if I find the truth, will it be me or Andrea who is to blame when the end of our marriage comes? Once I had the video, it was quite easy to associate the name with the face of the man who was next to my wife. Paul Jackson, Executive Director of Sales and Marketing at RBS. Technically, my wife's boss, 2 levels higher. According to his LinkedIn profile, he worked at RBS for almost 2 decades. And his Facebook said that he had been married for about the same amount of time and had 3 children. In the photo, they looked like teenagers, most likely still living at home. His wife is a pretty, dyed blonde, a typical smama. It's funny, but perhaps she was even more beautiful than Andrea, despite her age. Is Andrea cheating with this man? My mind told me that this was likely, if not obvious. My heart just wanted to stop and stop the pain. "Dad, I'm hungry," a voice was heard. "Me too." I put on the best fake smiling face I could muster. "Okay, let's just have a snack. Then we'll go pick up your mom at the airport, and on the way home, we'll buy pizza." The announcement of the pizza caused a storm of excitement. I took a deep breath and went to the kitchen. We updated it last year as our income grew, and I still haven't gotten used to where Andrea keeps half of her dishes and cutlery. I pulled out a couple of small red apples, the red delicious variety, and started slicing them. Having occupied my hands, I gradually began to emerge from my gloomy mood. I used a trick I saw in a YouTube video. I made little bunnies out of apple pieces. The kids loved it, and it was a great way to introduce them to healthy snacks. That's the kind of father I was. How then could I contemplate destroying their childhood? I needed more information. I had to take the next step, even if I didn't want to. I couldn't let the fear of knowing the truth or the anxiety of the unknown tear me apart, doing less than I am. Once I know more, maybe almost everything, I can make a decision. But by then, will it be too late? One of the fundamental facts of divorce in America is that no-fault divorce laws are at odds with the cultural reality that women are free to contribute more to the family than children and their care without any social pressure to do so. It's a far cry from the days when being a housewife meant actively working to improve the family's finances rather than finding new ways to spend money. My own mother grew and prepared food and collected newspapers, cans and scrap metal to sell for recycling. She would buy good quality clothes and mend them when we wore them out, and if my brother and I outgrew things, she would rip them out and turn them into new ones. She ran the garden. I saved the foil and rubber bands. She made her own jam, exchanged coupons with neighbors, and earned extra money by baking cakes. And at the same time, she still had time to be a mother to two restless boys, heal our wounds, console us, wipe our faces, and help with homework. She was perhaps even more important to our home than our father, and when he left, she became our whole world. Yes, times have changed. I understand that. But can I call Andrea as good a mother as mine, even taking into account changes in society? A woman who went to work to be someone else's wife while another woman raised her children. A woman who deliberately undermined the safety and financial stability of her children by deceiving her overly trusting husband. Without a doubt, Andrea is a bad wife. But was she a bad mother? These thoughts made me think of my daughter-in-law. I'm probably one of the few people who remembers what Amanda used to be like. We met when I was in college, and she seemed nice enough, but not my brother's type at all. She was plump, with thick glasses, mole-like eyes, and dull brown hair. I saw how she changed. First the glasses disappeared, then the weight went away, then different hairstyles and hair colors appeared. And then the breasts. Bigger, and even bigger. I shook my head. Of course, Mandy turned into a real sex bomb, almost certainly at Jake's insistence, but she also changed him. He suddenly turned from a reveler into a serious family man. The man who treated all his ex-girlfriends as interchangeable toys valued that chubby mouse from the very beginning. He saw something in her that I didn't see. But the main thing that stands out is that despite the appearance of an expensive woman of easy virtue, and the fact that she made a living as a model and adult videos, she never worked outside the home. She was always with the children, picking them up from school, taking them to sporting events, ballet, gymnastics, taekwondo. She made lunches and cooked dinners. Her career choice was unconventional, but her dedication to her family was impeccable. It was so contradictory that it turned my idea of right and wrong upside down. For most of my marriage, I felt better than my brother because of Andrea. Of course, she was not as glamorous as Mandy, but she was natural, real, honest, devoted, well-mannered, reliable. I didn't understand how Jake could trust a woman like his wife, with her obvious promiscuity and habit of exposing her body to thousands of strangers. Wasn't he tormented by uncertainty? But now everything has changed. I returned to the living room and placed the plate of bunnies in front of the children. They smiled happily and began to play with the fruits, showing them to each other. Their reaction made my heart smile. I will miss these moments being able to be with them every day. But it seems that this is the only future that awaits me. Once I confront Andrea with what I know, neither of us will want to stay in this marriage. I sat back down in my green chair. The advice Jake gave me the night we spoke came back to my mind. Don't fall on your bayonet. Andrea essentially threw me and our marriage into the abyss, leaving me floating helplessly in the air. All I could do was watch, think, and guess. But I knew that eventually, like everything else that rises, I would have to fall down. And I had a choice. I could choose where to fall, decide whether to fall on the bayonet or not. One of the many steps I took this week was to spend an incredible amount of time researching family law in Texas. I learned that I could file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity, and while that wouldn't necessarily affect the division of property, it wouldn't hurt either, especially if the betrayal was obvious or caused harm to the family. I also didn't need photographic or video evidence. The standard of proof in family court was lower than in criminal court. Things like checks, depositions, emails, or messages could suffice. But I probably needed more than I already had. I could put it together. But what about the division of property and child custody? Money, I decided, was not a big problem. I could get the house sold, split everything equally, and earn more later. If the court rules on adultery, I may not even have to pay child support to Andrea. She has a job, she can take more shifts. As for child support, I don't mind. These are my children, and if money is spent for their benefit, I am ready to put up with it. But custody, it was a serious issue. Now, it's almost certain that Andrea would have received primary custody. There is still a bias in society that women are better suited to raise children than men, even when it comes to their own fathers. From a practical standpoint, Andrea worked fewer hours than I did. She could easily claim to be spending more time with her kids, even if it was mostly hours spent scrolling on her phone or chatting with countless fans. Maybe I'm going too far with this assumption, but the essence remains. How good a mother she was or is now is not so important if her actions were not so bad as to cause the intervention of the guardianship authorities. But what will happen tomorrow? Or in a month, in 6 months? What happens if you don't change anything? If we get divorced now, or in a year, what will change? Unless I decide to do something. I looked at my watch. There were 2 hours left before we had to leave for the airport, and an idea began to form in me. I would have to make drastic changes. I would have to risk angering my wife. Most of us men are afraid of radical changes, especially when it comes to our wives. As long as they give us sex and appear to care, most of us are willing to put up with disrespect and neglect. This is a weakness common to us men, but I decided that I would work to overcome it. Andrea kept me on the defensive. She knew everything, but I supposedly knew nothing. This had become the status quo in our marriage, but I was determined to change it, to even the odds, and then tip the scales in my favor. It would take time, probably require the help of friends and perhaps some professionals, but a long-term plan was already emerging in front of me. By next year, I intended to be in a position to dictate terms to Andrea, conditions that she most likely will not like, conditions that would likely destroy her, but that would also provide the best outcome for me and our children. My wife has become the enemy of her family, and now it is my turn to fight with her. Of course, this will be a guerrilla war, and she won't even notice how it starts. Let the uprising begin. My mood was so gloomy that anyone on the street would probably think there was a storm cloud hanging over my head. I walked with my hands deep in my pockets, hunched over, slamming my feet on the ground with such force that it seemed as if I was about to fall through. I was angry. I just visited the best family law firm in town, and they told me exactly what I expected to hear. If I divorce Andrea, whether she cheats on me or not, I will be deprived of the right to see my children often. There's no getting around it. She's the primary caregiver, and because I work more hours than she does to provide food and shelter for the same family, my chances of getting primary care are zero. This reality was driving me crazy enough on its own, but coupled with having to pretend to be an unsuspecting husband all week, I was ready to explode from the stress. However, I had one thing that worked in my favor. Working to expose fraudsters at an insurance company gave me a good poker face and the ability to put on a mask of detachment on command. However, the situation with my cheating wife, and I still had no evidence, called my talents into question. I was on the verge of confronting her, which would be a huge problem since I had no real evidence, and a divorce right now would ruin any chance I had of seeing the kids more than twice a month. A recent visit to lawyers convinced me of this. And so, in this gloomy mood, just as I was about to step off the curb into the puddle, something happened that could be called a twist of fate or divine intervention. The answer to my problems was literally written in huge letters in the sky. Well, not in the sky, on a billboard. I looked up and saw the words, drunk driving, insurance issues, custody disputes, let Jose help. Jose Goldstein is the man on your side. The words of this ridiculous announcement alone would hardly have made an impression on me, but combined with the disgusting grinning guy looking down at me, I was touched. His ill-fitting suit barely hid his belly, his combed hair did nothing to mask his receding hairline, and his dazzling white teeth were strikingly artificially bright. Instincts, sharpened over years of working with liars, swindlers, and crooks, told me, "This is my man." I took out my phone and dialed the number. Within 30 minutes, I was sitting opposite Jose himself, and he was unhappy with what he saw. "So, Mark," he began, clearly feeling awkward, "I don't usually have clients like you. Are you saying you're investigating insurance fraud?" I nodded. "Don't worry, Mr. Goldstein, I'm not at work. I didn't come to discuss your clients. I just need good advice, and I'm willing to pay for it." My confession seemed to calm him down a little, and he sat back in his leather chair, twirling his fountain pen with one hand. However, from his appearance, it was clear that he had not yet completely relaxed. "I'll pay double the rate for your hour." This caught his attention. "Well, okay," he replied, noticeably perking up. "What can I do for you? Are you interested in hiring me to represent you in your divorce proceedings?" I shook my head. "Don't think." "Well, to be honest, I don't know yet. But I definitely want to hire you as a consultant. I need to understand, if you were in my situation, what would you do?" This clearly interested him, and a faint smile flashed across his face. I spent the next 15 minutes telling him what I knew, what I didn't know, what I suspected, and more importantly, what the best family lawyers in town had told me. He absorbed everything like a sponge, and I could see the wheels of intrigue beginning to turn behind his shrewd exterior. "So you have no evidence?" he asked, breaking the silence. "No, not really. Perhaps indirectly I know about her trips. I know that she was not where she said she was. I know that she flew to the airport from another place with her boss. That's all, but as far as I understand, it doesn't really matter in a divorce case, even if you file a lawsuit for infidelity." Jose nodded. "Well, it's true. Most courts don't care much about treason. Of course, sometimes you can get a conservative judge who would tip the scales slightly in your favor if there was solid evidence, but that's not what I'm asking." This intrigued me, and I motioned for him to continue. "First of all, we don't know what she does. Maybe she really is having an affair, or maybe she's doing something else. Perhaps even something illegal. You said she went to Mexico. You know, a lot of illegal substances are transported from there. What if your wife is a courier, or is her company a front for smuggling? Or maybe she is involved in human trafficking. There are too many what-ifs here." I couldn't resist asking, "And what will this give me?" "Nothing. Maybe, or maybe not. If you collect a lot of," he paused, "interesting circumstantial evidence and give it to the federal authorities, it could mean something to you." I chuckled. "Only if she really does something like that," I answered. Jose simply shrugged. "The FBI makes mistakes all the time. I mean, you can't influence what conclusions they draw, right? And as they say, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's probably a courier." I think I'm starting to understand where he's going with this. "Jose, I'm very angry with my wife right now, but I'm not sure I want to expose her as a traitor." This comment caused the lawyer to laugh loudly, so hard that his stomach began to flutter. "Mark, I am a court officer, and I will never tell you to frame your wife. I'm just saying that if you have evidence of her activities, you could. Selectively, of course, transfer some of it to the federal services." I nodded, indicating that I understood his hint. "Part of evidence. Only those that I want them to see so that they can draw their own conclusions." My instincts about Jose were 100% correct. "Anyway," he continued, changing the subject, "the point is, the more you know, the more options you have. And even if she's just cheating on you, I'm sure you'll find this information helpful too. The family court may not care so much, but she probably will, especially if you have evidence." I chuckled. Now he suggested that I blackmail my wife. "You asked what I would do. That's the first thing I would do, gather more information, by any means possible. It doesn't matter if it's admissible in court. Just knowing what's really going on gives you a lot more power." Think about it. He made a good, reasonable point. The uncertainty was causing me mental anguish right now, and while the truth might be painful, probably even unbearable, the knowledge gave me, as he said, options. He was right. Second point. Mark, do you like your job? He asked the next question. I shrugged. I'm good at this. I think I like her. Why are you asking? Should I quit? Jose stood up and walked to the coffee maker in the corner of the office. Do you want some coffee? He asked. Black, 2 sugars, I answered. He nodded. There was silence in the office as he continued to talk. Let me ask differently, is it possible for you to advance in your career with additional education? I don't know much about your field, but how, for example, does one become a manager in your company? I thought about it. It hadn't occurred to me before, but maybe something like an MBA or master's would help. Perhaps. Maybe something like an MBA or master's degree. Why are you asking? Jose nodded gravely as he poured the coffee. He added sugar to my mug and stirred it with a spoon that, it seemed to me, had not been washed since Reagan's presidency. You see, additional education opens up many opportunities. You could advance in your career and provide for your family better. Develop. Become a better, more well-rounded person. Many people go to school part-time to achieve this, but isn't that too long? If it were me, I would prefer to get this done as quickly as possible so I can start making money again. And then it dawned on me. He encouraged me to return to school full-time, even despite the reduction in income. He continued, of course, studying costs money. Do you have savings? Will they be enough to last, say, 2 years, pay tuition, and cover other expenses? I thought as I looked at my coffee mug, perhaps I could take out a loan. Jose snorted, clearly unhappy with my answer. I mean, I continued, I could probably pay for it all out of our savings. He smiled approvingly. Do you know what often happens? You can pay for your tuition in full in advance. Now the light in my head lit up with such force that I could hardly resist smiling. Jose hinted, the court may order our assets to be divided in half, but if I invest part of these assets in education, this can no longer be taken away. It was devilishly clever. I took a sip of bitter coffee. It was thick and slightly burnt, and the sugar didn't improve the flavor. I then placed the mug on his desk and shared the thought that had just occurred to me. Of course, if I go to graduate school, I will have much more time to spend with my children and a much more flexible schedule, right? The look Jose gave me was like the look a teacher gives to the brightest student. But Mark, if you go back to school, how will you pay the bills? Will your wife be able to take on more work hours? The thought made my stomach do somersaults. The part of me that was a loving and faithful husband hated the idea of Andrea spending even more time at work, possibly cheating on me. But the more practical side, the one who wanted to win custody of the children, saw only advantages in this. Firstly, it would balance out the difference in income and perhaps even tip it in my favor. This would mean that Andrea could end up paying child support. Secondly, her frequent absence from work would allow me to become the primary caregiver for our children simply because she would not have enough time. Jose leaned back in his chair and took a sip of his suspicious coffee. But there's one thing, Mark. Texas is a community property state. This means that your education, if you complete it, can be considered a common asset. This means you may have to pay back some of the costs or pay child support. I snorted loudly. What nonsense! Wait, then why are you? Jose raised his hand to stop me. I said, maybe, just maybe. In practice, this is an extremely rare occurrence and is usually used only when it is obvious that one of the spouses used the other to pay for studies. That's why I say you need more information. If you can prove Andrea cheated, you can file a lawsuit based on her guilt. You are a faithful and devoted husband who supported his wife through 2 pregnancies and allowed her to work part-time. Isn't it fair for her to support you while you continue your studies? After all, if she hadn't cheated, you would still be together. He said these words while standing, resting his palms on his desk. Then he smiled at me and sat down in the chair again. This guy was a real crook, but I followed his logic. On some level, I was aware that I was putting off fully investigating what Andrea was doing behind my back. Maybe I just didn't want to know the truth. However, if I wanted to end this marriage on my terms, I would have to face the truth, whatever it was. "You've given me something to think about," I said to Jose, getting up from my seat. He also stood up and extended his hand to me. "And one more thing, Mr. Lewis. Any lawyer will definitely tell you this if you are preparing for a future battle for custody, record everything. Every time you pick up your kids from school, drop them off, every evening you spend alone with them, every dentist appointment, soccer practice, or parent-teacher conference you attend without your wife. All. Get yourself a diary and write it all down. If your wife does something suspicious, record that too. This way it will look natural and not pre-planned." He let go of my hand, and I resisted the urge to wipe it on my pants. Jose truly deserved his fee and, perhaps more importantly, outlined a simple but possibly effective plan that could help me avoid the catastrophic consequences of divorce for me and the children. Despite myself, I began to feel sympathy for this rogue. After exchanging formal pleasantries and paying for the services with my personal credit card, I hummed to myself as I drove home. Tomorrow, I was going to talk to my boss about my future. How I liked this word, future. I finally started to see him, and all I had to do was keep my expectations in check. I had a ton of work ahead of me, and I had to do it perfectly, or it would all be for nothing. So is my marriage. Andrea Lewis Hampton. I sat alone in the break room and thought about how my life had become so screwed up. Fingers mechanically twirled the wedding rings, sometimes touching a mug of coffee that had long since cooled down. I'm sure there could be some kind of metaphor in this, but I was too distracted and too lethargic to catch it. I knew it was all because of the medications. They were affecting me more than I wanted to admit, and I hated being dependent on them. But I also knew that I needed them to keep me from going crazy from the nightmare my life had become. It all started with one fundamental misconception. It was so deeply rooted that I carried it within me since childhood. Looking back, it seems so stupid and naive that I can hardly believe I didn't realize how wrong it was earlier. But in my defense, I can say that I, like many other boys and girls born in the last century, absorbed an endless stream of nonsense from society, media, schools, pop culture, friends, and sometimes even family. I need to be happy. Not, I want to be happy or I would like to be happy, but I need. Happiness became the measure by which my generation, the generation before us, and perhaps even the previous one, measured success in life. Are you happy with your salary? Are you happily married? Are you happy with your weight? What about your clothes? Is your home comfortable enough? What's wrong with you if you're not happy? It was only when I sucked all the happiness out of my own life that I realized how fleeting and meaningless it is. Happiness is not a permanent state. It is a reward for hard work, for making the right investments, for good deeds. My children didn't make me happy. I was happy because they filled my life with meaning. My marriage didn't make me happy. I was happy because my marriage and our family gave me a sense of completion and meaning. It seems so obvious now, but back then I was as blind as all the other idiots chasing instant gratification. Since then, I have come to the conclusion that people are not created for constant happiness. In reality, we simply cannot exist in a state where rainbows and unicorns flash before our eyes 24 hours a day. Hell, even billionaires get depressed, don't they? This was my delusion. It became the foundation of a shaky tower of bad decisions that led me to where I am today, knowing that I had traded all my life satisfaction and self-worth for a fleeting euphoria that, when it faded, left me an overworked and drained woman, isolated from myself. This was not a recent revelation, far from it, but it has been haunting me for the past few weeks. It all started when I returned home after my last work trip. Usually, when I return home, Mark greets me happily, but this time he was distant and sullen. I'm ashamed to admit this, but my first reaction was resentment. You see, I needed this moment, that moment when I come home and immerse myself in the love of my husband and children. It was vital to me because it was the only thing that kept me sane, the only way to distance myself from the woman I become when I'm away from them. But this is directly related to what I said about happiness. See how painful and confusing this is? Instead of worrying that my husband might be going through a hard time or needing emotional support, I needed to get my dose of happiness. And if he didn't give it to me, it was his fault, not mine. It doesn't matter that I just spent a few days earning my $50,000 bonus through, to put it mildly, unorthodox methods. This amount may seem huge, but honestly, if you count it for one service, then I was already working at wholesale rates. When this all started, it was almost an accident. I received a $5,000 bonus for one drunken evening when I served a client. It was an isolated incident, an episode that I never planned. Then I felt terrible, just disgusting. I never wanted this to happen, but you see, I really needed happiness. Being a housewife is hard, not physically, but emotionally. This is isolation. It's the feeling that you have no value because you spend most of your day cleaning up after your kids or comforting them. Of course, as an ardent feminist, I have always been of the opinion that a woman has the right to choose, but the subtext has always been if she chooses to be a good feminist. And in our society, those who manage the house and prepare dinner for their husband's arrival are rarely considered good feminists. So even though I felt fulfilled, I had to work hard, and I wasn't happy, at least not all the time. And here's the problem. I was taught, even subconsciously, that life is determined by the level of happiness in the moment. I begged Mark to let me go back to work, even though I knew I was breaking my promise to wait until the kids were older. I told him how unhappy I was, and being the caring husband that I am, he put my happiness above all else, as I always did. This was the first bad decision in my tower of bad decisions based on a false understanding of life. The second mistake was my decision to return to work with Mags. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit that Margaret was a bad influence on me. There was something completely irresistible about Mags from the moment we met in college. I was captivated by her personality, her thirst for life, the desire to be happy at any cost, regardless of the consequences. For me, she was an ideal, a strong, independent woman who went after what she wanted, regardless of those she might hurt in the process. Looking back on our entire friendship, I was glad that she mostly stayed away from me while I stayed home with the kids. I probably would have been an even worse mother than I ended up becoming. But when I returned to work at RBS, within a week we were having lunch together every working day. 2 weeks later, I was already going to girls' parties with her once a month. After a month, it became a weekly thing, and then she started telling me about her life. About her affairs on the side, about her affair with John, about how she makes extra money by giving kickbacks to suppliers and sometimes adding a little something on top. It was scandalous. I was shocked, but somewhere deep inside I envied her. She was so free, so alive. The admiration I had for her since college flared up with renewed vigor. She seemed perfect. No, not who I wanted to be or who I wanted to imitate, but she seemed like an ideal to me. She enjoyed life, and life reciprocated. She had everything she wanted and an insatiable desire to get even more. What about me? I was just a mother with 10 extra pounds after pregnancy, working part-time to avoid having to face the fact that being a mother, despite all the rewards, is very difficult. The sad reality was that my dreams of becoming a superwoman would never come true. And while I may never be able to say, I have it all, somehow I became convinced that Mags did. She seemed so powerful to me. The story of my fall, or at least the first step down, is not particularly exciting. We went out of town to meet with clients. It was my first trip since returning to work. The only thing that made this meeting important was the presence of our big boss, Paul Jackson. He was an attractive man, a little overweight, but well-groomed and exuding the aura of an experienced salesman. He personally selected Mags and me for this trip, citing our best knowledge of the product line that the customers were interested in. Of course, it was complete nonsense, and, as I now understand, a trap, but I took it bait, line, and sinker. It felt good to be recognized as more than just a diaper changer. Paul was cunning. He practically did not interfere, leaving all the work of processing me to Mags. Every evening, we took clients out to dinner. On the first night, they all went to the club, and I returned to my room, like a respectable and faithful wife. The next day at lunch, Mags enthusiastically told me about her exploits, and I could hardly hide my shock and curiosity. Mags, is this even normal? What if Frank finds out? She smiled at me with that familiar smile that always said, "Oh, you naive child." She knew how to undermine my self-confidence with this look. I still don't understand it. Honey, how will he know about this? This is perfect. We are far from home, we don't know anyone, and no one knows us. There is no way this could get to him. I didn't know and told her about it. Look, Andy, I'm not saying you should cheat on Mark, but what's wrong with having a little fun? It turned out quite a lot. The second night, I called Mark again to say goodnight, and then went to have fun with the group. I got drunk. I had a lot of fun. There were occasional touches, but nothing serious. Mags was right, relaxing a little was completely harmless, and it made me happy. And as we remember, happiness was incredibly important to me. On the third night, I drank too much alcohol again and ended up kissing one of the clients and Mags. It all started as a joke in college. Mags and I would sometimes pretend to be gay girls for the boys' amusement. We teased them, provoked them, and then laughed at them. But this time I was so drunk that I didn't even notice that I stopped kissing Mags and instead started kissing some man whose name I don't even remember. It dawned on me for a moment, but I was too drunk to stop. It was only because I was unable to continue that my virtue remained intact that night. But I justified it to myself by saying that it's not that bad. After all, I didn't sleep with him. On the last night of the trip, Mags and I got drunk, and then, at her urging, I satisfied a client in the back seat of a taxi. God, Andy, have you seen Trent? Mags giggled as we left the bathroom. Yes, he really had a blast with you. I laughed. I'm sure if you satisfy him, he'll sign the contract right now, she said, laughing. No, I muttered, I can't do this. I'm married. Oh, come on. It doesn't even count as cheating. Come on, I'm egging you on. If he signs the contract, you'll get a fat bonus, and no one will know about it. I slapped Mags on the arm and laughed. I thought she was joking. Later, when we were driving back to the hotel, I was still drunk and under the influence. Come on, Andy, Mags encouraged. I'm egging you on. Why I did this still remains a mystery. I'm not a child. The fact that Mags goaded me into doing this shouldn't have made me do anything other than laugh. Yes, I was drunk, but I understood what I was doing. At that moment, I was only thinking about myself, about the party, about how fun and young it was. After this event, I used many excuses to explain to myself why I did it. But the truth is that I consciously chose this path. When I returned home, I couldn't believe how low I had fallen. But even this was only the first step in a long fall down. The morning after returning from my trip, Paul Jackson called me into his office. I thought it would just be a discussion about a signed contract, but what happened changed my life forever. Sit down, Andrea, he said, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. I was nervous, but I complied. He turned his monitor screen towards him, clicked the mouse, and started the video. When I saw what was happening on the screen, my heart sank. The video showed me and Trent in a taxi. I could barely breathe. So, Andrea, is this how we make deals at RBS? He asked calmly, but with obvious sarcasm. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Questions were running through my head. How did Paul get this video? Who filmed it? Was it Trent? Why did he do this? And then I understood. It was Mags. She set me up. But why? Why did this damn woman do this? Here, take this, Paul said, handing me some kind of document. Am I being fired? I whispered, barely audible because of the sounds from the screen, where I was doing what I now hate myself for. Paul laughed and turned off the video. No, Andrea, on the contrary. Look here. He pointed to the check in front of me. I looked at him and my breath caught. The check was for $5,000, my share of the bonus, for a successfully completed deal. You and Mags make a great team. This is your share. Keep up the good work. I don't remember how I got back to my desk. I just sat there for the rest of the workday, looking at this huge check that I received, becoming the woman I now despise. I was so stupid and naive, but not completely an idiot. I immediately understood what this meant. Paul now had power over me. He had a video and could ruin my life at any moment. If Mark sees this, my marriage will be ruined. The only thing I could do was continue to play by their rules in order to save the family. Now I regret that I didn't come home then and tell Mark everything. Yes, we would most likely get divorced, but I could live with it. Perhaps I would not be now dependent on antidepressants and would not walk around with a constant feeling of horror, as if darkness was looming over me. But then I chose a different path. I obeyed and became part of this game. This job destroyed me, but at that moment I still didn't understand it. I got home, poured myself a cup of iced coffee, poured it down the sink, and went to tell Mark the good news about how well I was doing at work. However, before I could say anything, he greeted me with words that made my heart skip a beat. "Honey, we need to talk." These 5 words always give me a panic attack. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet, but automatically sat down opposite him on the sofa. "Did something happen?" I whispered. Mark shook his head. "I quit today. I decided to return to university." Normally, such words would have caused a storm of indignation in me. How could he make such an important decision without discussing it with me? But I was so relieved that he didn't say, "I know you cheated on me," that I just mumbled. "What? How? When?" Mark leaned towards me to take my hand, but I involuntarily pulled it away. An emotion flashed across his face that I couldn't understand, but I ignored it. "You know how much I hate my job," he began. I froze. Did he ever tell me about this? Have we spoken to each other at all lately? Perhaps this was the reason for his mood since I returned from the trip. I desperately wanted to believe that was true, so I simply nodded. "But how will we pay for this?" I whispered. "How will we live? I only work part-time." "Andy." Mark looked at me with some kind of cold-blooded metal in his voice. "For how many years was I the only breadwinner in our family while you stayed at home with the children? Did you hear me complain? Did you say we can't afford it?" For a moment I felt a flash of anger, but, as if stunned by all my recent actions, I remained silent. "Did you hear me say that we won't find a way?" Mark continued. His words sounded cold and hard, like the edge of a knife, which pierced deeper with each subsequent sentence. Previously, I would have flared up in response, starting to shout at Mark for making such important decisions without my participation. I would remind him that raising the children we agreed to have together is not the same as his sudden decision to go back to university. I would say that in marriage we need to discuss changes like this, that we can't take each other for granted. But Andrea had been dead for a long time. She was killed by the lying, cheating version that took her place a few months ago. I had done many things that I was ashamed of, but the moment I was faced with my husband's obvious irritation and accusing gaze, I could not bring myself to commit another act of hypocrisy. So I let it go, which led us to today, a meeting with Paul Jackson, just half an hour ago, where I asked for a full-time job. Andrea, what a surprise. Paul seemed really surprised by my request. He knew that I was. More than confused about how I had been earning my bonuses for the past few months. Of course, I played by the rules with the team, but a whole mountain of compromising evidence hung over my head. I had no choice. "What made you come to this?" he asked, with a slight smile on his lips. "My husband is going back to university, and I need extra hours here in the office. That's it." Paul grinned and leaned against his desk. "So you don't share your bonus checks with your dear husband?" How could I? I made over $50,000 on my last sales trip, but there was no way I could simply deposit that money into a bank account without some kind of secure cover. Mark was a financial fraud investigator, and I knew there was no way to make this dirty money clean enough for him not to discover it. That's why I needed the extra hours. I needed paychecks to show up on our bank statements, and I needed to have tax certificates. Paul knew this. He was just making fun of me, so I didn't bother answering. There was a tense pause, after which Paul stood up and walked slowly around me, clearly enjoying the spectacle. A chill ran down my spine, my stomach, already agitated, clenched into a lump. But there was something else there that I didn't want to admit. "We can arrange this, but there is one condition," he whispered in my ear. "What?" I started, but before I could finish, he put his hands on my shoulders. Crap. I knew where this was going. "You will become my new executive assistant, Andrea. You know the position became available after Julie went on maternity leave. Julie was a blonde balloon girl who used to be Paul's personal toy. Her style was that of a roadside woman, and it was clear why Paul liked her. Of course, there were rumors that the child she was expecting was not her husband's. Maybe it wasn't even Paul. He looked down at me, his piercing gray eyes full of amusement and malice. It was his game. He never said directly what to do. Everything was based on expectations. We had roles, our place in the relationship, and mine was obvious. After all, he held all the cards. I swallowed the saliva that had collected in my mouth and involuntarily licked my lips. What do they say about injuries? The body remembers. Mine certainly remembered. Months of use and manipulation had developed certain automatic reactions in me that left me empty of shame and lamenting how far I had fallen. With usual ease, I began my task. I knew from experience that he would gradually relax, allowing himself to feel my attention. Paul, as always, was confident and in control of the situation. "Well done, girl," he said, patting me on the head like his assistant, which I was. "You will go on trips with me, that's obvious. You'll keep your deal-making commissions as you do now, and of course, your new desk will be right in front of my office." Paul was clearly pleased with my progress at work and decided to share his thoughts about my duties and appearance. He wanted me to look brighter, to fit his idea of a professional image, but his words made me feel strange. It all seemed wrong to me, but I continued because I wanted to stay in this place. "No more restrictions. Your style needs to be more confident," he said. I winced a little. His instructions regarding appearance were quite categorical, and it was difficult for me to accept his vision. But at the same time, I felt that this was part of my new image. "Do you understand me?" I nodded, but didn't expect his harsh tone when he asked again. I asked, "Did you understand me?" "Yes, sir," I said, trying to keep my emotions under control. All this was very unusual, but I continued to follow his instructions. "Fine. You are my assistant, and when you are with me, you must live up to it." I tried not to show my feelings when Paul moved on to discuss my new responsibilities. Everything happened so quickly that I could hardly process what was happening, but I knew that I had to adapt. Paul ended the conversation as quickly as he began, saying one last time, "When you're done, put everything in order here." After he left, I remained in the office, feeling confused. My emotions were mixed, and I tried to figure out what was really happening, why I was allowing this to happen, and why I continued to follow his instructions, despite internal protests. I looked at the clock in the break room. This entire exchange had happened almost an hour ago, and I was still shocked. It wasn't about sex. Paul had done this several times before, and each time it was just as humiliating and rough. No, it was all about the feeling of impending doom. My situation was already bad, and I had more or less accepted that, barring some miracle, my marriage was already on its last legs. Something will happen to hint to Mark that something is wrong. It's inevitable. I couldn't hide what I was doing. It was too wild and too out of control. Illicit substances helped me control myself, but sooner or later I would either break down or make a mistake. Mark is too smart not to notice when I slip up. The only silver lining in this whole situation was that if he did return to university, he might be too busy to notice what was going on. This would give me time to develop an exit plan and escape, if you will. I only hoped that when the time came, Mark and the children would run away with me. I sighed. It was time to go home and tell my dear husband the good news: I got the job. Jake Lewis. One of the benefits of running your own consulting firm is the ability to set your own hours. For a long time, I worked from home on Mondays and Tuesdays, which essentially gave me a 4-day weekend if I really needed it. Of course, I spent most of my time meeting with clients or doing design work, but always in the comfort of my large home office. When the girls were little, we made a schedule: first daycare, then school and activities, so that Mandy and I were home alone 2 days a week. To be honest, we often used this time for fun. The number of daytime pleasures with her was, frankly, amazing. But it also fit perfectly into what was slowly becoming Mandy's professional career. I think it's worth saying a few words about this. What my wife does can be described in different ways and in different terms. I've heard and used terms like adult model, adult entertainer, or professional streamer. All this explains quite painlessly what she does. However, Mandy herself does not call it that. Her preferred term, like herself, is quite bold and defiant: professional lightweight two-piece. She explained this to me one day. I am bright and over the edge. I like being the caricature of femininity. Everything is big, from my hair to my heels. I look like a bimbo, and I love it. You like it too. I love it when everyone undresses me with their eyes. I love that my body is a living advertisement of who I am. I'm definitely like that. Just professional. What? I replied wittily. What do you mean by professional? Mandy smiled at me. First of all, at home I am yours. I've always been yours. You made me this way, and I allowed it because it turns me on. I love being your doll, your walking fantasy, your fairy tale. It was true. Our relationship was structured in such a way that while I couldn't say I had control over her body, it was more that she changed to suit my desires, and I was never shy about telling her what I liked. I realized that many people might consider this abusive or potentially abusive. I was no fool. But also, she was my wife. I vowed to protect her, take care of her, support her, and she didn't complain about how I kept up my end of the bargain. I was serious about this and made most of the decisions about our life thinking first and foremost about what would be good for my wife, since she was completely dependent on me both emotionally and physically. Normally, she continued, that would make me just a trophy wife, and that's what I was for the first few years of our marriage. I nodded and took another sip of beer. We were having this conversation at a local golf club, and it seemed to me that several people nearby were eavesdropping, or it was just my fantasy. Mandy always attracted attention. But now that I've started to develop my social media presence, my fan page, my streams, I'm a professional. My image, my presentation, my aesthetics are my brand. Understand? I understand. Her outfit at the time was a perfect example: a crop top without a bra, emphasizing her impressive size G breasts. Since then, she has enlarged them twice more, a bare stomach with a pendant on her navel, where a 1-carat diamond hung. Short pleated miniskirt, thigh-high stockings, platforms. Even her clutch is in the shape of a heart. She had an aesthetic, that's for sure, and I understood marketing and branding. Heck, I helped her come up with her internet name and handled the registration of her business and domain registrations. Many years have passed since that conversation, and our girls are much older and much more aware of what their parents, especially their mother, do when they are not home. But initially, those Mondays and Tuesdays were working days for Mandy's private business. She did a lot of things on her own, but sometimes she needed help, and on those days I took time to help her in any way I could. Sometimes it was just working with the camera, and sometimes she asked me to help make a more intimate video. I try not to think about how many photos and videos of my participation exist on the internet. At least I have nothing to be ashamed of. Anyway, it was Tuesday. We just finished taking photos for her social media and fan pages. We usually film at home or against backdrops, but today we were in her studio, a former guest room that we turned into a mixture of boudoir and audio-video center. It was equipped with multiple AI cameras, microphones, mobile lighting, everything you could imagine. We also often had sex here, as this room was in the farthest part of the house, away from the children, and Mandy didn't like to hold back. "What's in the box, honey?" I asked, pointing to the brown package on the floor. "It was delivered this morning." "About," she exclaimed. "Looks like it's finally arrived." I need this for filming. Mandy picked up the box and asked for my knife. A few minutes later, I was looking at something that looked like something out of a Lovecraft horror movie. What the hell is this? This is a toy, Mandy replied, holding it in her hands. I understand, but what is it for? I already guessed, but I still couldn't believe it. One of my fans ordered it for me. He wants me to make a video of it. I charged $200 for the video, and he also paid over $100 for the toy itself. They are very expensive. She pointed this thing in my direction. People are just going crazy. To be honest, I was amazed that people were willing to pay my wife $200 for a few minutes of video, especially considering that if no one was paying her, she would still be doing it for half a day for free. It was a good scam. She was making several $1,000s in some weeks through custom videos and streams, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to hide her income with my creative approach to business accounting. One of my latest efforts was leasing a Barbie pink Jeep with a QR code on the back window. With her obviously altered sex doll-style body and wardrobe that was a mixture of Barbie and prostitute, she chose not to hide it all, but to be extremely open. You'd be surprised how many moms thought she was amazing over the years, especially after they realized she would never go after their husbands. I was about to ask Mandy a few more questions about filming with this thing when my phone started playing Green Day's Basket Case. You know he'll be mad if he ever finds out it's your tune for him, she said. I chuckled and answered the call. Hey Mark, have you found what you need for Andrea yet? 3 months had passed since our unsuccessful surveillance attempt in Chicago, and although we had been unable to obtain any incriminating evidence on Andrea, Mark persisted in his grand plan to expose her. I not only heard, but literally felt Mark's sigh transmitted through my phone. No, not yet. She is very careful, but more than that, she always lies to me about where she is going. I can see how this could be a problem. Actually, it's even funny. You can't directly catch her lying because that would bring the whole situation to the surface and ruin your plan, right? Mark's plan, as I understood it, was to make the most of his divorce from Andrea and obtain custody of the children. To do this, he quit his job, effectively forcing Andrea to return full-time, and now spent his days either studying or caring for his children. That's right, he replied. This is something I must avoid at all costs. I can't let her know that I have suspicions before I strike, otherwise all my preparations might go down the drain. Yes, I understood that too. I don't think judges are favorable to those who try to circumvent the system. You should really hire a private investigator. Hell, I could lend you the money for that. I know you will return them in time. There was a pregnant pause on the other side of the line. I know I should. But what if he gets caught? There's something wrong here, something more than just Andrea cheating. I think it has something to do with her work. I felt that my younger brother was on the verge of despair. Mark was usually a confident guy, just like me. Do you think this is just an office romance? Is your wife hanging out with her boss or a colleague? Mark's voice became lower, almost a whisper, as if he himself did not trust his precautions against eavesdropping. I found money, Jake. A lot of money. It was interesting. How much exactly? I asked. $250,000 in a secret account that Andrea is hiding from me. To say I was stunned is an understatement. Look, I wasn't complaining about the income. My own business was quite successful, and my wife's income was, frankly, higher than most doctors or lawyers. But even we didn't have $250,000 just sitting in a savings account. Damn it. What do you think this is? Prohibited substances. Theft. Holy God. This could be. I had no words. Big, said Mark. I agreed. Yes, big. Fucking huge. Have you thought about going to the police? Mark sighed again. I can't for the same reason. What if they don't find something to attract her for? Then Andrea will know that I figured it out, and my whole plan will go down the drain. I need something to help move this impasse. That's why I called you today. I need help. Mandy, who had been listening to our conversation, spoke before I could. Don't worry, Mark. We've got your back. That familiar sparkle appeared in her eyes again. That look, full of excitement and excitement. She enjoyed our past experiences as detectives too much. I just rolled my eyes and groaned. Well, where to this time? Mandy and I spent another half hour on the phone discussing his plan with Mark before I had to get on the video call with the client. Mandy's client, that weird guy, had to wait until tomorrow to get his video because the videographer was busy. We ended up coming up with a slightly better plan than the last time we went to Chicago, mostly because Mark had more information and was better prepared. "Do you think we can do it, dear?" Mandy asked. She literally glowed with excitement. I, on the contrary, was much more pessimistic. "Listen, honey, I don't know. I'd say it's 50-50. Mandy stuck her tongue out at me and giggled. She knew when I was just being stupid. To tell the truth, I was pretty confident that we would succeed. Mark organized everything really well. All I had to do was invest the money and handle the logistics. So getting everything I needed should be easy, at least if I could keep my wife from turning into Detective Breastmagie. Damn it, how she was drawn to such adventures. Mandy was rummaging through her closet, or rather, her huge collection of bikinis. She pulled out an incredibly tiny black bikini. I've seen eye patches in bigger sizes. "To hell with it," I said, watching her take off her clothes. Thinking about Mandy parading along the beach in that rope, I couldn't help but smile. At least our little adventure to Hawaii would have its positives. Mark Lewis. I ended the call and deleted it from my call history. A couple of good things came out of a failing marriage first. I had more time with the kids, but beyond that, it repaired my relationship with my older brother. The truth is, our relationship was never that good, and that was sad. Brothers and sisters, eh? Too stupid to understand what's important until something hits us over the head. It made me regret the years spent resenting each other, but perhaps it was necessary, perhaps we both needed to grow up, each in our own way. I didn't know the answer, but I did know one thing. I was grateful to have someone I could trust. The children were asleep in their rooms, the lights were off in the house, and Andrea was allegedly in Dallas that evening for a meeting with clients. I opened another window on the laptop and brought up the GPS coordinates of her car, bag, and phone, all of which were in almost the same place. She never left Houston. Apparently, the stated travel time gave her more time for her. Entertainment. I exhaled and rubbed my eyes. For the 1,000th time, I toyed with the idea of leaving the kids with a nanny and going to catch Andrea by surprise. Since I started tracking her with GPS, the temptation to catch her with her lover has become almost unbearable. I had to constantly remind myself that catching her cheating right now would be detrimental to my plans. I have to wait for the perfect moment to show my cards, and then it may be too late for her or the family court to harm me. I took out my journal and wrote down that I stayed with the kids today while Andrea went to a meeting in Dallas. Jose suggested keeping a regular paper journal over time. It will show signs of wear, which will give the records more authenticity. I wrote down the date and noted that a little over 3 months had passed since my trip to Chicago and the start of my plan. A quarter of the way was over, but there was still a lot of pain ahead. Studying was going well. I started working part-time in the computer lab on campus. It gave me the opportunity to study and demonstrate that I was making a good faith effort to contribute to the family budget. This was also Jose's idea, and it could have played a big role if Andrea's lawyers tried to make me guilty of paying for the tuition. I met many students, most of whom were 10 years younger than me, but every now and then an older student would pass by my desk, glance, and then give me a knowing smile, a silent but palpable sense of camaraderie. It was nice. Even more enjoyable was the time I spent with Susie and Junior. I never realized how much I was missing out on their lives while working full-time. Deep down, I knew how important these years were for them, how quickly they develop and change, but it was only by watching them almost daily that I realized how quickly it all happened. It brought me bitterness and regret. I was not there for them when I should have been, and now that I am there, their happy life is built on borrowed time. "Damn, Andrea," I muttered under my breath. There were no more Andy, darling, or darling. Ever since I found her secret bank account, she's been fucking Andrea. The anger I felt towards her was constantly bubbling under the surface, and I was grateful that with our new schedules we saw each other infrequently enough that it didn't get out of control. Although, sometimes it was difficult to hold back. The last such incident happened a week ago. Since Chicago, our sex life has changed dramatically from what I thought was normal for a couple with small children to something closer to what a couple in their 50s would be like. Or worse. To put it bluntly, we've only had sex 3 times in the last 3 months. The last time I was this angry and consumed with rage. I was rude to her. I didn't know who this woman was, and after it was over, she came to her senses and looked at me with a mixture of horror and disgust. Did she suspect that I knew something? Did she think I was just particularly horny that night, or did she realize that I was treating her like the prostitute she was? Whatever was going on in her cunning, deceitful head then remained a mystery, because she didn't tell me anything. I just turned over and fell asleep. Even now, I wanted to kick myself. I almost ruined everything. Humiliatingly, I had to apologize to her the next day and make up a story about how I was fascinated by something I saw on the internet one day. Although, at least she showed decency and did not reproach me for watching the video. Even more humiliatingly, I spent the rest of the week playing the role of a naughty schoolboy desperate to reform. I bought her flowers and apologized for her rudeness. He said that I loved her and wanted to make love. It was a complete disgrace, but I did it myself, so I had to eat it. And mostly it worked. She hinted that she wanted to spend a special weekend with me before her trip. The same trip where she probably had sex with her new boss, Paul Jackson. Part of my plan was always to get Andrea back to work full-time. This was a reasonable decision. This way, she would have almost no chance to demand alimony from me. It also gave me the opportunity to establish myself as the primary caregiver for our children. I hoped that in the future in court, this would help me get full custody. Of course, even with paperwork and time on my side, it would be an uphill battle, but I was determined to give myself and my kids the best chance. And that meant I'd been eating a lot of crap sandwiches lately. However, it is one thing to believe that she slept with Paul Jackson, but quite another to prove it in court. Andrea turned out to be a resourceful and cunning cheater. She did not use email, text messages, or phone calls to organize her affairs. Everything seemed to happen at work and was discussed only verbally. My latest attempt to obtain evidence was a mixed bag. I bought a rather expensive voice-activated voice recorder and hid it in her bag. It worked generally as advertised, but unfortunately the acoustics were so bad that I could barely make out what anyone was saying. However, today I replaced the old model of the voice recorder with a new, more advanced and high-quality one. Now all I could do was take it out of her bag and hope for the best. Perhaps this time I will get something useful, at least a tip on her plans. Maybe I'll even find out how she got so much damn money in her hidden bank account. This money. There was no way she could honestly accumulate $250,000 from her job in sales, especially in less than a year. After all, she was selling building materials, not luxury yachts. No, there must be something else here. I automatically thought, what if I'm wrong? Maybe Andrea is not cheating on me, but is something worse, a criminal, a fraudster, or maybe even a courier. God, that would be funny, I said out loud, turning to myself. My wife is a courier. Stranger things have happened. I needed to know the truth. And even if my voice recorder doesn't record anything today, it can do it next time or the next time. And if that didn't help, I had my own plan to get the details of her life, and I would wait for her to go to Hawaii. If she really was going there, Andrea may have deceived me, but the GPS always told the truth, even if that truth was unpleasant to me. I turned off the computer and went to pour myself a drink. Andrea was still pretending to be a good wife, so she would be home sometime before midnight. She'll likely say she took the 10 p.m. flight from Dallas, arrived in Houston around 11, and then drove home from the airport. All this, of course, is a lie. In fact, she was in some apartment in the city center, only 20 minutes from here. She uses the extra time supposedly spent on the road to cheat, destroying our marriage. So many lies, so much deception, and I have to pretend not to notice anything. The only thing that made it bearable was my own deception. The deception is so massive that when it collapses, the smoking crater of her life can be seen from space. I turned off my laptop and headed to the kitchen to pour myself some whiskey. The thought of Andrea returning home again with a sweet smile, as if nothing had happened, filled me with deep disgust. I looked at the bottle, wondering how many more times I would have to swallow this bitter pill before I could finally complete my plan. Since I started this game, my life has been a balancing act where I have to be both patient and ruthless. Any mistake could destroy everything. If I show my hand too early, she will gain an advantage and I will be left with nothing. After taking a sip of whiskey, I looked at my watch. 22:40. Andrea still has an hour and a half left to return home, pretending to be the ideal wife. I again imagined her entering the house, taking off her coat, leaving her bag on the shelf in the usual way and kissing me on the cheek, as if we were still a happy couple. The anger inside me began to flare up again, and I squeezed the glass until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to take a deep breath and reminded myself that no matter how hard it was worth it. After all, I was protecting not only myself, but also my children. My thoughts went back to Susie and Junior. They were my light in this darkness. Every day I spent with them strengthened my resolve. I saw how they grew, how their personalities developed, and I understood that for the sake of their future, I was ready to go through any tests. All that remained was to wait for the right moment. On the table in front of me lay my diary, a simple notebook with a faux leather cover. In it, I wrote down every detail of our family life, every event, every lie of Andrea. All this would become part of the evidence base, which I hoped would help me win in court. I opened the diary and flipped through the last pages. There were notes about how I spent time with the children, helping them with their homework, reading them bedtime stories. The truth was captured in those pages, the truth that I was a good father. Unlike Andrea, who spent her time meeting with clients, I was the one who truly cared about our family. I closed the diary and looked at my watch again. 23:05. She'll be back soon. I collected my thoughts, put the diary in the desk drawer, and headed into the living room. The lights in the house were dimmed, creating a cozy atmosphere, the mask of calm family life that we both wore. There's a knock on the door. I took a deep breath, stood up, and went to open it. I walked towards the door, feeling the anger rising within me again with every step, like a poisonous wave. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain a mask of calm. Opening the door, I saw her Andrea standing there, with a fake smile on her face, holding a suitcase as if she had just flown in from a business meeting. "Hello, dear," she said with a slightly tired but friendly tone. "How are the children?" "They're sleeping," I answered briefly, moving away to let her pass. She went inside, placed the suitcase against the wall, and, with a familiar movement, took off her coat, hanging it on the hanger. She put the bag on the shelf by the door, exactly what I needed. Inside was my new voice recorder, which I installed just a few hours ago. "How long did it take you to fly?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound as casual as possible. "An awfully long time," she replied, taking off her shoes and sighing. "These evening flights are simply killing." Lie. Her car had been parked all evening in the city center, not far from some elite residential complex. I didn't say anything, just watched her, noting to myself how she avoided looking me in the eyes. "Would you like tea or coffee?" she suggested. "No, everything is fine." "You better get some rest," I replied, pretending to be a caring husband. She nodded, smiled, and headed towards the bedroom. I waited until her footsteps died down, and only then did I approach her bag. Opening it, I quickly found the recorder, checked it, and put it back, making sure that everything was in place. "I'll pick it up tomorrow to listen to the recording." My hand lingered on the clasp of her bag. For a moment, I wanted to drop everything and just take her hand, demand answers, confront her with the truth. But I knew I couldn't. It would be too risky. Everything has to be perfect so that I can emerge victorious from this game. I returned to the living room, poured myself another whiskey, and sat down in the chair. The night was quiet, only the ticking of the clock broke the silence. I thought about what awaits us ahead. All these lies, manipulations, deceptions, all this had to end. Once upon a time. But not now. Now I was waiting for the right moment, the right chance to strike. I took my last sip and stood up to turn off the light. There was another day ahead, another step towards ending this marriage, which had long been a farce. It was getting light. Mark sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee while the children were still sleeping. He took the recorder out of Andrea's bag and connected it to his laptop. Several minutes passed before he heard the recording. At first, conversations in the office, ordinary discussions of projects, harmless jokes. Then, "Paul, this is too risky. If Mark suspects something." "You're halfway there, Andy. Calm down. We have everything under control." Then there were hints, halftones, but the context was clear. They talked about money, about the money that was kept in a hidden account, about connections with clients that seemed to be more than just business relationships, and about something darker. "You must deliver the goods. Everything will be as always. Fly to Hawaii, play your part, get paid. But if the FBI finds out..." Mark felt his body tense. This was exactly the trail he needed. His wife is indeed involved in something more than adultery. By evening, Mark had already compiled a dossier. He had audio recordings, statements about hidden money, and GPS data. The whole truth lay before him. He was ready to strike, but it needed the right moment. When Andrea returned home, Mark greeted her with an expression that she could not decipher. He was holding a small box in his hands. "We need to talk," he said, pointing to the chair. She sat down carefully, feeling the tension fill the room. "Did something happen?" Her voice sounded deliberately calm. "You will tell me the truth. Now, or I'll show this to the police." He opened the box where the recorder lay. Andrea turned pale. "Mark, it's not what you think." "What exactly?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Do you sell illegal substances? Are you involved in money laundering? Or is it human trafficking?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, this is wrong," she tried to explain, but her words sounded incoherent. The truth was that, in addition to sexual services, she was actually engaged in delivering goods for the company's gray clients, a job that Paul arranged for her. She didn't know all the details, but she was getting her share of the money and was too scared to refuse. "Do you think you can save yourself by lying to me until the last moment?" Mark's voice became cold. The next day, Mark went to see Jose Goldstein. They discussed the details, how to present the collected evidence to the police, and how to keep the children safe. 2 days later, federal agents came to Andrea's house. Mark personally gave them everything he had. Andrea was arrested on the spot. Her face expressed a mixture of shock and horror. She tried to say that it was a mistake, that she had been set up, but her words were drowned in cold silence. The children were with Mark while Andrea was taken away. 6 months later, Mark was sitting on the sofa watching Susie and Junior play in the garden. His lawyers won full custody. Andrea received a suspended sentence for financial fraud and aiding a criminal group. He felt relief, but not joy. The marriage he once treasured ended in the ashes of betrayal. But now he had a new goal to build a life for himself and his children where the truth would come first. Hosea's voice sounded in my memory. "Don't fall on your bayonet." Mark looked at his watch and went to prepare dinner. Life went on. 6 months after the end of the whole ordeal, Mark sat on an old leather sofa, listening to the sounds of his home. Outside the open window, the happy voices of Susie and Junior could be heard playing in the garden. The sonorous laughter of children, interspersed with quiet whispers and cheerful screams, seemed to fill the emptiness inside him. He looked at their movements through the colored curtains and felt a slight pain in his chest, mixed with something similar to relief. It was all over, but for some reason there was no real joy. Rather, just silence after a long, exhausting storm. Mark's lawyers achieved their goal. Full custody was in his hands. It had cost him endless days of worry and sleepless nights, but now the children were with him, and he knew they were safe. Andrea, his ex-wife, received a suspended sentence for financial fraud and aiding a criminal group. Everything that once connected them, everything good and bright that he felt for her, collapsed under the weight of betrayal and deception. His heart did not burn with hatred, it only remained empty, like a room after a sudden move, where everything loved and familiar suddenly disappeared. He felt relief, but not the joy he expected. The marriage he once treasured has turned to ash. The memories seem distant and almost unreal, as if it was not with him, but with someone else in another life. Looking at the children, he understood. Everything is different now. He had a new goal to build a life for himself and his children where truth and sincerity would come first. There will be no more lies, disappointments, and fear. He had to teach them to believe in goodness, and that even after the most difficult times, light and peace can be found again. The voice of Jose, his longtime friend who had gone through a lot with him, suddenly came to mind. "Don't fall on your bayonet, Mark. Just don't do it." These words seemed mysterious to him then, but now he understood what Jose was talking about. It should not have been completely destroyed because of the mistakes and betrayals of other people. It was necessary to continue to live despite the pain and loss. Life is never without difficulties, but the most important thing is not to lose yourself. Mark looked at his watch. The hand showed almost 6 in the evening. The children were still running around the garden. Their voices could be heard from afar, bringing a feeling of calm. He slowly got up from the sofa, stretching his stiff muscles, and headed to the kitchen. Today, he decided to cook dinner something simple, but loved by the children. Perhaps baked fish with vegetables and mashed potatoes. Life went on, not the one he dreamed of, but his own, new, full of hope for a better future. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.